I do this for you. And I'll be honest right now, I really hate doing this for you. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome to Mount Marathon.
Seward is not a very big town. Home to just about 2,700 people according to the 2020 census, the little port on Resurrection Bay in Alaska's Kenai Peninsula is the kind of place where you wouldn't really assume all that much happens besides fishing and tourism. The former is the original reason that people settled along the little strip of land between the calm waters of the bay and the shale-tip peak of Mount Marathon, a 4,826-foot tall peak in the Kenai Mountains. Established in 1903, it was named for former Secretary of State William Seward, where it served as the endpoint for what was then known as the Alaska Central Railroad. You may also know the name Seward because of a little thing called Seward's Folly, which is how they referred to the purchase of Alaska back in 1867, because that was not a popular decision amongst American citizens. Having been to Alaska very recently, in fact, to research for this video, I'm glad we bought Alaska. Alaska's chill. We saw some bears, I saw a humpback whale, but back in 1867, the country had just started recovering from a pretty major war, the civil one. And the fur trade was kind of, on its way out, so nobody was really sure what was going on up in Alaska. Oil was not much of a thing yet, and then in the 1890s, something really cool happened, which was they discovered just so much gold. A lot of it was over in Canada, which, not very chill of you, Canada, to hoard all of it, but we still got some. In any case, when Seward first appeared on the US Census as an unincorporated village in the year 1910, it had a population of just over 500 people. And those early settlers found some interesting ways of entertaining themselves, such as running up and down the local mountain. It's a tradition which continues to this day, with Seward residents and outsiders alike gathering every 4th of July to see who can make the 2-mile journey to a false summit at 3,022 feet and back down in the shortest period of time. According to the City of Seward's website, the 3.1-mile race has an average slope of 34 degrees and is 60 degrees at its steepest, and trust me, that description does not do the course justice. Most of the path followed by the racers is visible from the streets of Seward, weaving its way up the mountain to a false peak now known as Race Point for obvious reasons, after which, runners go around a little rock, get their bib number and time recorded, and then proceed to throw themselves back down the mountain. That is to say that while the trip up the mountain takes the average racer somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, the trip back down is completed in only a third of that time. Officially, the race originated in 1915, but local legend places the date a little bit earlier. The Seward Seaport Record issue for July 4th, 1952, reporting that fact and fiction are pretty well mixed in any history of the race on Mount Marathon. As the story goes, in 1908 or 1909, a grocery store owner by the name of Gus Borgen wagered that the mountain could be climbed in under an hour and offered $100 to the first man who could do it. The bet was taken up by a young man named Al Taylor, a clerk at Brown & Hawkins General Store, which is actually still in operation as a hotel to this day. And speaking of things that are in operation in Seward, I was genuinely impressed by the level of just craftsmanship and artisanry that went into everything. Like, it's this tiny little town just on the coast of the Kenai Peninsula. It had great coffee, great gelato, great Greek food. We had great food there. It was a fantastic place to be. Also, shout out to Mike, our guide for our trip up in Alaska. I'll get into a little bit more of the trip at the end of this. I want to talk about it because it was a lot of fun, but I want to get through the case first. But shout out to Mike, our guide. He has a podcast called American Anthology, too. He was a phenomenal guide, a phenomenal cook, and just a really fun guy to be around. Like, Mike, if you happen to be watching this, we had a phenomenal time with you. And seriously, guys, he's a joy to listen to when he talks about history. I highly recommend checking his stuff out. But back to the history of this race, because we need to talk about the history of the race before I can tell you about the guy who went missing during it. Well, you see, Taylor was successful in making his ascent to what would be known as Race Point in the future, but it took him more than an hour. It took him an hour and 20 minutes. As for how this whole wager turned out, the story is not very well documented. I'm just going to be very clear about that. it's hard to tell what happened here at all. In any case, word of this new challenge began to spread amongst the men of Seward and then even the sailors who came into the bay, and after, not all that much time, every ship had a champion of its own after putting in at the port. Thing is, a race with that many champions is a race with no champions at all, so they decided to set an official date on which the record for the Mount Marathon race would be set, and that first date was July 4th, 1915. In that first official race, the record was set by an Alec Bolam, who came in with a time of 54 minutes and 12 seconds. From that point, over the following decades, word of this race would spread far and wide, but at the time of this article's writing in 1952, no non-Alaskan had ever won the race. The closest any non-Alaskan came to winning the race was in 1951 when a Harold Walker of Kansas came in third place. As popularity grew, the event expanded to include races for women and even children, though limits had to be set to prevent any environmental impact on the mountain itself. So, until the year 2012, the limit for how many people could participate was 350 adult men, 350 adult women, and then 200 children, typically 100 boys and 100 girls. Now, as you might imagine, there were more people that wanted to participate than would be allowed, so the way that they would handle this is they set up a lottery. This lottery had so many entries that Doyle Woody, writing for the Alaska Daily News in 2012, remarked that the running joke for years has been that the only thing more difficult than running the annual Mount Marathon for the first time is actually gaining a spot. One of the articles I read, and that I'll be citing throughout this story, referred to this as the Olympics for the people of Seward, that they take it that seriously. To that end, in 2012, the race committee for the storied 4th of July race made several changes that may make it easier to get some new blood into the men's and women's fields. One part of that solution was a change in the previous tradition, in which every finisher would gain extra entries for the next year's selection, while the other was an expansion to 400 runners in the adult divisions. But that new limit of 400 was not to last, in large part due to the fact that that very year, a 65-year-old man by the name of Paul LeMaitre would run the race, and he would never come back down. As you can imagine, on a channel like this, doing transitions into ad reads is never the most, simple thing to figure out. So in this case, I'm just going to tell you that I want to introduce you to our sponsor for this video, Factor. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you probably know about Factor because we have had a deal with them for a long time, and that's because we like them. Factor is a meal delivery service. It is that simple, but what makes Factor special is the fact that I don't get tired of it. There are 34 or more menu options at any given time. They range from, chef's choice that's really just, kind of a good, solid, flavor-packed meal, all the way to keto diets. They have protein plus. They even have vegan stuff, which I don't touch, but, good for you. Another thing I really like about Factor is that if I'm feeling something more like, pancakes, that's an option. Factor doesn't just do, the same meals over and over again. In addition to having all of those dinner options, you, of course, you can also eat them for lunch, obviously, but in addition to that, there's breakfast options. You get pancakes, you can get granola bars, you can get cereals. They also have really solid protein shakes and some smoothies that I actually really enjoy. I know one of the things that I love most about Factor as a person who works just kind of constantly is that it's just convenient. It's easy. I don't have to spend a ton of money on takeout, and then I also don't have to take an hour out of my night to cook and clean up afterwards. And because all of the ingredients of every dish are listed right there on the package, I know exactly what I'm eating, and I know that it's dietitian approved. If you want to give Factor a try yourself, like we have for the last over a year, because like I said, I actually do keep this stuff in my fridge and I do eat it, then you can go to factor75.com or click the link in the description and use code LORELodge50 to get 50% off your first Factor box, as well as 20% off the next 4 following. Once again, that's 50% off your first box and 20% off the next month's boxes using code LORELodge50 at factor75.com. The only way you'll ever make the Mount Marathon race safe is by not doing it. This statement, originally made by Mount Marathon Race Committee member Flip Foldiger, is included towards the end of a fantastic 2016 article in Runner's World written by Christopher Solomon and entitled The Last Man Up. Solomon's article is probably the single best piece of journalism I've ever read on this case, and I will be referencing it throughout the remainder of this video. In fact, if I say something and I don't immediately cite it, You can probably assume that I got it from Solomon's article. There are a number of things that Solomon talks about in his article that did not make it into this video, and I think that he definitely deserves the views because he did such a good job with this. He actually went, he did the course himself, he interviewed people who were there and involved. I could not do this video without Christopher Solomon's work. In The Last Man Up, Solomon describes the race as a scrabble about 2,900 vertical feet straight up cliffs and mud and shale before finally staggering to race point, followed by hurtling back downhill in what more resembles free fall than running. Looking up at the mountain myself, the first thought that I had upon reaching our campground in Seward was that I must be looking at the wrong mountain, and who on God's green earth would actually want to do this? Even as we walked a much easier trail up the slopes, it was clear that this was not a race where safety was much of a concern or even a possibility, the dangerous terrain itself being part of the challenge. At 65 years old, Paul LeMaitre was definitely on the older side of race runners, with most of those running at his age being longtime competitors, people familiar with the mountain course and its various hazards like loose rock, streams, and extremely dense undergrowth. However, it was not Paul's first time doing something he was unprepared for at this level of activity. He'd skied the 210 miles of the Iditarod Trail Invitational in the 80s, and he'd finished last both times, though the second time was because he was helping the other guy who was really slow. Another time, he and a friend named Rich Ansley had once taken Paul's fiberglass dory, a tiny little boat. I think they are typically between 16 and 23 feet. They attached a motor to it, and then they sailed it from Anchorage to Homer, which is a distance of about 120 nautical miles through waters that Aiden and I can tell you from experience are not smooth. LeMaitre's oldest daughter, Mary Ann, told Christopher Solomon that her father subscribed to the duct tape answer to life, while Ansley told him that they often felt the only reason we're alive is that we entertained God. Back when I was in high school, I used to tell my friends that part of the reason I believed in the Lord Almighty was because someone had to be messing with me. I'm kind of I get where Paul was coming from. So, unsurprisingly, when the letter came informing Paul that he had won a slot in the 2012 race, he was unfazed by the explicit warning which read, "Do not make the July 4th race your first trip up Mount Marathon." He once again ignored these warnings on the evening of July 3rd, when organizer Tim Liebling told racers gathered at Seward Middle School, "If you have not been up that mountain before, you should consider going home right now, and you should not be in the race." Now, Paul was in great shape for a man of his age, regularly lifting weights and running, and he had actually recently competed, just a month prior to that, a 12K, but Mount Marathon is a different beast entirely. In addition to that, I did not include it in the script initially, but I felt it was necessary to mention, his vision was not good. I believe it was advanced glaucoma, but he could not see very well. Aiden, was it advanced glaucoma?
Yep.
Damn, I'm good. Suffice to say, Paul should not have been running this race. I think it's important at this point in the video, regardless of any nonsense that may have gone on later, Paul LeMaitre should not have been running this race. Like, I climbed this mountain less than a week ago. I should not run this race. Aiden actually made it all the way to the top of the mountain, and he should not run this race.
Not quite the top.
Not quite the top.
There was not enough sunlight.
Ironically, the reason we could not get up to the top of a mountain in Alaska is that the sun went down.
In the summer.
In the summer. Solomon's article describes the safety presentation given by Liebling, in which he warned participants of the cavalcade of hazards, bears, falling rocks, and important landmarks, most notably the turnaround rock called Race Point. Remember, you can't beat the mountain, but the mountain can beat you, was the end note of the video presentation, and let me tell you, that is not a joke. The mountain kicked my ass. I actually can't imagine trying to run this.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you really got.
My legs are already burning. Kids do it. There is a children's version of this. Oh, wonderful. Side stitch. Ugh. This sucks.
Yeah.
This is not a fun time. I'm not enjoying myself. All right, give me a sec. Whew. Don't film this. Don't film me being weak.
It's like a parallel with you and Isaiah, except this time it's Noah.
You're breaking the mystique. You're breaking the mystique, Aiden.
And we were on the easy trail. We took what was called the Skyline Trail, which, as opposed to the Mount Marathon Race Trail, is a 4-mile hike, which, has the same last mile. But on your way up, you're heading up a much more gradual slope to the top. I only made it about halfway up that mountain between a mixture of asthma and a crippling fear of heights forced me to turn back. Thankfully, Thornbury and our new friend Noah were able to mostly complete the ascent, but it got dark before they could get up there. Both of them had done a good amount more prep than I had, and even then they couldn't make it to the turnaround point in the 3 hours we had to make that 2.5-mile hike. Suffice to say, I am very impressed by anyone who can finish the race, and especially impressed by David Norris, who just this year set a record of 40 minutes and 37 seconds, according to the Colorado-based Steamboat Pilot. Steamboat, I said. Steamboat Pilot. I can't speak anymore, I talk too much. On the day that Paul LeMaitre made his attempt, the winner of the race was Matt Novakovic, who crossed the finish line just 44 minutes and 7 seconds after the race started at 3 o'clock p.m. Paul followed in the second wave, which began at 3:10 p.m. on that somewhat rainy day, running north from the intersection of 4th Avenue and Adams Street in downtown Seward until the pack reached Jefferson Street. At that point, he turned left and ran another 800 or so feet until he crossed 1st Avenue onto Lowell Canyon Road. Then another 1,000 feet or so after that, the race abruptly turned into the forest. From there, it was a climb of 2,675 feet across a distance of about 1.1 miles, passing the tree line at about 960 feet, and then he would have been visible for the most part from 1,600 feet on, where the mountain's brush turns to raw shale. Paul reached that milestone at about 4:30 p.m., an hour and 20 minutes into his race, when most participants were on the way down and many had even crossed the finish line. The moment Paul crossed that threshold was captured on camera in what has become a rather famous photograph. It's the very last picture ever taken of Paul. Eyes as wide as his smile, bib number 548 visible on his hip, with mud coating his knees and water clearly soaking through his headband, shirt, shorts, and sneakers. The 65-year-old was firmly in last place and a good distance behind the next closest competitor, according to Tim Walsh, who was a race organizer who spoke to Christopher Solomon for The Last Man Up. Walsh said that just after 5 p.m., a longtime racer straggled to race point, and that racer said he was the last guy. But just to be safe, Walsh and his other race officials responsible for marking bibs and times waited another 45 minutes. With 6 p.m. nearing and nearly 3 hours having passed since the race began, Walsh and the others packed up and began to head down the mountain. And it was shortly after that that Walsh recalls an exchange that has stuck with him for years. Solomon reports that as Walsh hiked down that afternoon, he saw another man slowly climbing, about 100 yards away and dressed lightly as racers do, in black shorts, black t-shirt, black headband. That man asked him, "How far am I from the top?" He replied, "About 200 feet, to which the man called back, "Can I still get a finish?" Walsh told the man that he needed to get up to the top, round race point, and then head back down via the descent trail. And then he asked for the man's bib number. 548 came the reply. It was Paul LeMaitre. With just a couple hundred feet to go towards the midpoint, there isn't much that one could expect to go wrong. So, Walsh texted the team at the end that bib number 548 will be down in about an hour and a half. At the bottom of Mount Marathon, Christopher Solomon wrote that Peggy, Paul's wife, shivered alone in the rain, honking her car's horn and screaming her husband's name at the base of the mountain to guide him home. An hour and a half passed, and then an hour 45. And then finally, 2 hours after Paul had asked, "Can I still get a finish?" Peggy went to the authorities. Now, in many of the cases we cover, we are pleasantly surprised by the number of people that get out there to search and how fast they're able to do it. Often at minimum, we're seeing several hundred people in the first couple of days. But this is Alaska. It's the least densely populated state in the Union, with only 750,000 people covering its 665,000 square miles. If Manhattan had the population density of the 49th state, our guide told us while we were up there, it would have a population of 8 people. In part due to this, and also in part due to the remote location of Seward, a full 127 road miles south of Anchorage, the search for Paul LeMaitre was rather limited, with just about 60 people taking part. That might sound like enough people, considering it's a relatively small mountain and the route was fairly simple. In fact, many who have discussed this case, including us in the past, have noted that this is part of what makes the whole disappearance so odd. It was such a small spot for somebody to go missing. How did he get lost? When you've been on the mountain, however, you quickly come to realize how utterly insufficient that would have been, even with the assistance from the 210th Rescue Squadron of the Alaska Air National Guard. Their FLIR-equipped helicopters are touted by the Alaska Dispatch as a heat-sensing device so good it can identify a polar bear sleeping in its snowy den along Alaska's Arctic coast. But in the dense undergrowth of Mount Marathon, FLIR would be a lot less useful. Meanwhile, on the ground, teams would have struggled against the same obstacle for different reasons, as traversing off-trail means putting aside branches, turning over logs, and checking your footing with every single step you take off the trail. If someone were to fall beneath the brush line, he could tumble for meters down the steep slopes before stopping. And if he was knocked unconscious, it would be nearly impossible to find him. As we trudged our way along the Skyline Trail, we noted how easy it would be for someone to get lost. In fact, we almost immediately got off of our intended trail as we attempted the climb, simply because there are so many false paths leading all over this mountain. Does this feel right to you?
No, not at all. It feels way too much downhill.
Yeah.
Well, it might be going.
It might wrap around.
Well, yeah, but looking at the other trail, or looking at the map, it looked like...
Like there was a little bit of a down, but I don't know. Seems like a lot of down.
Seems like a lot of
We are going the right way because that's the water right there, and the trail is.
We're going the right direction for sure.
They don't have.
Well, hang on.
Let me go ahead and see if it curves back up.
Alright, let me take a look at where we are. That is not where we are.
I'll come with you so we have at least two to a group.
Oh, there we go. I think we're supposed to be up here.
Okay.
Maybe we turned off too early?
Maybe.
Aiden! Is it possible we turned too early?
It may have been. There were a couple also small trails that went up to the left. It's possible we didn't turn early enough. Like I said, we'll go another 100 yards down this trail, see if there's any curve or not, and come back.
All right. And they were never seen again.
I guess now we can see how easy it is for somebody to go missing taking a wrong turn.
Yeah, right.
Down here, yeah.
Yeah.
Up there. So I'm thinking if we... Maybe it's this way.
That's the problem. That, which I think is looped around there.
Well...
Did we have to cross? Did you take a picture of the map? Did we have to cross the creek on the map? Did anybody take a picture?
It wasn't that detailed.
Okay.
Here. Huh. Yeah, we were supposed to go on that same loop as them. We turned too early.
Yeah.
Okay.
'Cause then
That goes up. So we're gonna go back there, we're gonna go up and then curve that way. And then it's gonna be a hard right.
Alright.
You got a nice nice badonk there, bud. Oh, I caught that on camera.
Love that. Me in the future, put it in.
Immediate wrong turn.
Yeah.
That is an impressive one. That's bad even for us. No mistakes, just happy accidents. As far as what tools the ground teams had at their disposal, that information's also extremely limited. I didn't see anything about whether or not they had bloodhounds, whether or not they had other scent dogs, whether they had cadaver dogs, or if it was just people walking through this territory. There's also the fact that this is a region inhabited by bears and other wildlife as well. So that's another thing that needs to be considered when you look at how the search was conducted, what risks they could take, and what could potentially happen to somebody who falls unconscious in that area. However, there still is the issue of where Paul went missing, and the simple fact that the mountain is so utterly bare at the top. How could someone disappear when all he had to do was turn around a rock and go back down the way he came? First, we should quickly address the fact that the top third or so of the mountain is bare shale, and in our previous video on this case, we noted that racers can't, or the race, we should say, can be seen from the streets of Seward. In fact, I believe that we said that racers were visible to the naked eye, and while that is technically true, it's not quite to the extent that it may seem. On your screen right now is a picture of Mount Marathon, and now on your screen right next to it is a picture of Thornbury and Noah at the top of the ridge near Race Point. If you can't see them, they're those two tiny dots that I was able to capture using the 25 times zoom on my phone camera, and binoculars were not much better. Our boys were wearing bright blue and green shirts and waving a white hat around, and we could only barely see them when they had the sky to their backs. Not the most important thing, Aiden says, but it was a red hat. If someone were trying to find Paul, all they would have been looking for was a black dot against dark gray shale. So the more interesting question is not how did nobody see him coming down, but rather how did he get off the trail in the first place? As David Politis puts it, Paul disappeared in an area where there had been hundreds of runners, an area that had a very well-marked trail and an overlook near the summit where there can be no mistake in which direction Seward and the finish line is located. The summit area has very little foliage and lots of rocks, dirt, and boulders. Politis is correct in his description, but Thornbury and I felt that there was a possibility he and others, again including ourselves a couple of years ago, may have failed to consider. Paul didn't get lost at the summit. Now what I mean by that is not that Paul LeMaitre didn't get lost on Mount Marathon. He very clearly did. What I'm saying is I don't necessarily think that he got off trail by accident originally. Now, in order to explain what I mean by that, I first want to have Thornbury come on here and sit down and explain what the top of this mountain actually looks like when you're up there. Because if you're Paul LeMaitre and you're well aware that you are way behind and you're just trying to get down that mountain, you might think to take a different trail. Thornbury actually took that trail, and I felt that the best way to sort of prime you for the theory we have here is to bring him on so he can explain what he saw when he got up there.
Noah and I were determined to get as far up the side of the mountain as possible because we wanted to give you as good of footage as we could of what it would have been like for LeMaitre on his way down after the race. Unfortunately, as Matt has said earlier, due to the lack of sunlight, we had to stop before we got to race point. But we got relatively close, as you saw in some of the images of where we actually ended up. Unfortunately, because we didn't make it that high up, I didn't get a ton of great footage from where we were in terms of the shale line, from where vegetation stops and where it's just basically purely shale from that point up. But, you know, we'll utilize what we have. Essentially what the mountain is like up above the tree line is there is light vegetation from the trees until a line of shale. And then from that point on, it's basically just all rock. There's some moss here and there in little crevices and things like that, but for the most part, it's really just rock. The trails are pretty clear when they're scattered amongst the vegetation on the lower elements of the mountain, but once you get to just the shale, they're not as clear. You can see where it's kind of stamped down where people have been traveling more frequently than not, but up towards the very top of the mountain, it gets a little bit more difficult to find where exactly that trail is. I know when Noah and I were climbing, we were very, on trail up until the point where the shale hit, and then as we were trying to find a point to look down at camp so people could see us, we thought we were on the trail for a minute, then not quite, and then we looked back on the other side of the ridge, which I guess would have been either the south or the west side. We saw that the trail was a little bit more clearly marked, but it was harder to find. Now that's only true of that shale portion really on that top, not even third of the mountain. And on the other side of the ridge, from what you see on the lower portion of the mountain from where Seward is essentially this, what looks like a green caldera. I don't know if the mountain was originally a volcano or not, but there is this just beautiful valley that we took a bunch of pictures and video of because it felt like something out of the Lord of the Rings, where there are a variety of different trails that are clear amongst that because there is vegetation that the shale can then be kind of, parsed from. What this means generally is that any point in which you cross from the shale portion of the mountain to a vegetated part of the mountain, there are clear trails within that vegetation that all generally lead downhill to some degree. In that caldera-looking area, there were a variety of different trails that led to the Skyline Trail that we originated from. All of this to say is that if you take the race trail up and then you're looking for a way down, really pretty much at any point from the shale, as long as you're heading downhill, when you get to a point of vegetation, you're generally going to be able to find some evidence of a trail that then you can follow down either the Skyline Trail or one of the other trails from the front. If you're going down the back, it's likely going to be that Skyline Trail. That middle section of the mountain, where it's moss, grass, a few bushes here and there, is definitely the clearest part of the mountain in terms of what is and isn't a trail, because unlike the top of the mountain where it's all shale and it's difficult to find the trail, the lower portion of the mountain is difficult, not necessarily because the trail isn't clear, but because there's a lot of overgrown vegetation that we got lucky for on the day that we went, because there was a man on a bike that had come up with essentially a shovel that he was whacking down vegetation to clear out what trails were there and what weren't. Previously, they were very overgrown, and you could see that by the evidence of all of the vegetation that he had chopped off that were laying on portions of the trail. Similarly, on the way down, there are a variety of different trails that you can take once you get to the lower portions of the mountain that don't lead to the same place. Like what Mattis alluded to, we got lost at the very beginning partially because of these trails, because at the very end of the mountain, there are a lot of different trails that lead a lot of different ways, and it's hard to parse out which direction is correct. Even though through the tree line you can see the body of water that Seward is jutting up against, the trails don't lead directly down the mountain toward that. Despite the potential confusion on the lower portions of the mountain, it was very evident from where we were on the Skyline Trail and what the view was of the race trail from when we started, that the Skyline Trail was definitely a much easier trek. And if you're Paul and you're the last one in the race, and at this point you're exhausted and you want to get down in a less strenuous manner, then the Skyline Trail would have been a great option to descend the mountain at an easier pace, at an easier rate, that was going to be kinder on all of your body, essentially.
To illustrate the point that Aiden just made, I thought it would be prudent to use the GoPro footage of each of our treks down the mountain so that you could see a direct comparison of what Paul might have chosen given the two options. Consider the two possibilities. Which would you prefer if you're Paul LeMaitre? Now imagine that you're Paul and you're still trying to get home as quickly as you can, so you're still jogging, you're just doing it on the Skyline Trail. Your chances of rolling your ankle and falling down are exceedingly high. I was just walking down that trail and I was watching where I put my feet. I was pretty tired, but I was still paying attention. I tripped and rolled my ankle a couple of times. I'm 26. For me, that's, like, ouchie owie. Like, that's not great. For a 65-year-old man, that could be a crippling injury. And Aiden just reminded me, one really important aspect here is that Paul had advanced glaucoma. He could not see as well as your normal person. In fact, he saw worse than most people. The reason I think that's such a big factor is something we noticed as we were running our way around these trails was how many false trails there were. Basically, I'd say every 100 yards, you had at least one trail that looked like it could be the right trail that went in entirely the wrong direction. As you're starting off, it's a pretty obvious trail. At the very least, it's, heavily pebbled. It's clear that this is a place that people frequently walk. But once you get up past the tree line, these are basically little game trails. They look like they're more established by mountain bikers than they are by hikers. So the main trail itself is in a lot of places no more than 12 inches wide, and then the false trails all around it look pretty much the same. There's also a number of dry creek beds that look like they might be trails. They're not. There are a few places where there's sudden drop-offs that if you're not paying the utmost attention, or maybe you're moving a little too fast, you could run right off the trail without even realizing you're about to do it. And as Aiden mentioned, that portion at the top of the Skyline Trail, you're behind a ridge, so had Paul gone around Race Point and then down onto the Skyline Trail portion, he would not have been visible until he got basically back down onto the brush line, especially because he would have been a black dot against a whole bunch of gray. So by the time Paul would even have been visible had he taken the Skyline Trail, he would have been nearly a mile to the north of where people were looking for him. One thing that I actually didn't even know until just now, because for a good portion of this section of filming, Aiden and I were in different locations, is that as we were getting back into camp and everybody else was trying to spot them, they were on the phone, it took them a solid 10 minutes to locate these guys as they're standing up on top of the ridgeline, waving their arms like this. So even as they're actively trying to be found, it took a while to see them. Paul wasn't actively trying to be found, so if he got off the wrong direction, he's probably not going to be seen at all. And just to reiterate, Thornbury and Noah were these, dark figures against a white sky background. Paul, black figure against a dark gray background. If we could barely see them, nobody was seeing Paul. The other thing to consider is that, the top part of the mountain, the shale part, that's not particularly wide, several hundred yards at most. But by the time you're down to the brush line, you're looking at over a mile just on the front side of the mountain. You get down into the tree line, you're starting to look at a couple of miles. And it's not like you're on a trail that's going directly down the mountain. There are often portions as you're working your way sort of down the side of the slope where the brush between you and the ground is taller than you. So nobody below you is going to be able to see you at all during those portions. There were only a few spots inside of the brush line where you would firmly be able to see somebody. One of them is the little clearing where I actually turned back. So really, the explanation for how Paul LeMaitre could have gotten lost would be he tried to take the easier trail, he got into the brush line, and then from there, he took a false path, he made a wrong step, lost his footing, fell, and got knocked unconscious. From there, it's unfortunately not a very happy explanation. One of two things is possible. Either he had a brain bleed from hitting his head and he died as a result of that and just nobody found him, or alternatively, there are large predators that roam these mountains. With just 60 people looking, if he was inside of the brush, the FLIR from the helicopters wouldn't really be able to help all that much, especially as his body cooled down. And the chances of finding him with that few people in that dense an area are just so incredibly low. Even if there was no predation and he just fell and hit his head, with how cold it gets in Alaska at night, even in the summer, and the fact that it was pretty wet out there that day and he was covered in sweat, chances are if he was out there overnight, he would have succumbed to hypothermia no matter what. So at the end of the day, well, I don't think that we could reasonably say we've solved the case of what happened to Paul LeMaitre because his body has never been found. I think this is a rather reasonable explanation for how he could have gone missing under these circumstances. What I do think was really cool about this specific case for us was that, while this isn't the most mysterious one we've looked at, it is one of the first times we've really been able to go to the location and see what happened. We tried it a couple of years ago with Wendigoon. We were talking about Dennis Martin for the first time. We weren't really well prepared for it. We didn't get it out as far as we wanted to. In this case, we were really able to immerse ourselves a little bit more. We stayed in Seward for 3 days. We hiked up the mountain. We hiked up mountains around it. I sort of conquered my fear of heights, and all of that was made possible by a company called Trovatrip, and I want to make it clear right now that they did not pay for an ad slot right here. I'm just telling you what we did, because what they allowed us to do was gather together a group of people, mostly people who watch this show, and we just all went to Alaska. We spent a week there. We went to Denali. We spent some time in Anchorage. We spent some time in Seward. We went on a wildlife cruise. Aiden and I had a great time on the wildlife cruise. Like, honestly, at the end of the video, if he's got time, maybe he'll just throw in some footage of us slipping and sliding around on the wildlife cruise. Not everybody had a great time on the wildlife cruise, but Aiden and I had a great time on the wildlife cruise.
Yeah, I got it. We're good. Just for our own personal reasons, we need some Jack Sparrow music.
We got to meet a whole bunch of really cool people. We got to see a bunch of awesome sights. And what's really awesome is that we're going to get to do this again. We're going to go to places like Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Colorado Rockies and the Canadian Rockies and probably Banff. We'll probably go back to Alaska at some point. So these trips are things you should be on the lookout for if you're interested. We're hoping to do at least 2 of them a year, maybe one out doing camping and hiking, and then one that's going to be more of like touring historical sites. But we had a lot of fun with it. It was a great time. We met some great people, and I absolutely cannot wait to do more of these and to share them with you guys. We'll be launching a survey to decide where we're going next and gauge interest in that next trip very soon, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. We're thinking that we're probably shooting for May or June of 2025. I will tell you, these trips are not inexpensive to go on. We try to keep the price as low as possible to cover our own expenses and allow the most people to go, but if you're interested in going, it's definitely the kind of thing to start saving for well in advance. That said, there are also installment plan options. You can pay with Affirm. We'll get into all the details of that when we launch the next trip. For everyone who came along on this first trip, I gotta say we had just an awesome group. I am so glad that we got to meet all of you. You guys made it a lot of fun and just so easy. I don't want to name drop people. I don't want to, put public names out there. But for those of you who went, you guys were awesome. We are so happy that the group gelled as well as it did, and we hope to see many people again on future trips. And I also hope we get Mike again. Mike, our tour guide, was phenomenal. Just really great guy. Such good chili. That was such good chili. Oh, he made borscht too. Like we had Alaskan native style salmon. Or I should say an Alaskan native inspired meal. We had a Russian inspired meal, and then we had an American inspired meal, like a Gold Rush era. It was phenomenal. Also, 49th State Brewing has the best sodas I think I've ever had in my life. We got to check out the replica of the Into the Wild van. We should pop a couple of those pictures in too, because we got some good ones. I mean, if people are interested in seeing more of that trip, I'm sure we could put together some kind of video and put it up on Patreon for free. So if that's something you're interested in, let us know. Comment, say Lore-Alaska or something cheesy like that. I don't know. We also thought about doing a confession booth. We'll definitely do that next time. We just didn't plan it well enough. It will be on you to decide which parts of what you hear are true. With all that said, though, first of all, obviously, I want to thank Trova Trip for putting us out there and sending us along. We had a great time, and we can't wait to do it again. I want to thank Factor for obviously sponsoring this video and so many of our videos in the past. We are really grateful for that continuing partnership, and we are grateful for you as an audience who keep coming back and watching our videos over and over and over again. You allow us to live our dreams, and that is truly something we appreciate. And of course, while your views are all we ask for, if you do wish to provide additional support to the channel and to our further endeavors, we hope to do a lot more on the ground stuff in the future as we work our way into, I guess, phase 4 of the Lore Lodge at this point as the years go by. So if you want to support us more directly, we do have a couple of Kickstarters we're going to be launching. One to help pay for some upgraded studio equipment, and one to help pay for some fun community features. And you can help out by contributing to those when they go up, or you can become a Patreon member. We have Patreon subscriptions for just $1 a month. That gets you access to exclusive content. We don't charge a lot for it because the exclusive content isn't currently as frequent as we'd like. We're trying to get back onto a monthly schedule for you. We're just bad. Speaking of Alaska, I have this. Hi, Smella. I have this thing. We met some of her Alaskan cousins. They were a bit harder working. This needs to pay rent. It doesn't look like it's going to. So you can subscribe to us on Patreon to help us pay the rent this dog won't. You can also drink the lodge by going to tableauroastingco.com and ordering Mount Pocono Perk, a coffee I designed myself after many years of baristing. If you would like to wear the lodge, feel as though you're in our skin, you can do so by going to bunkerbranding.com and purchasing from our collection, which has a few new designs as well as the classic Lore Lodge logo, and as you might expect from two bro dudes, the Lift Lodge. The best way to stay in touch with us and get updates on what's going on is to join our Discord. You can do that by going to bit.ly/jointhelodge. And of course, if you want more Lodge, you can catch us live at 7 p.m. on Monday nights. That is 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And the only time that will change is if there's a Monday night football game involving the Philadelphia Eagles. You can also get more Lodge by checking out our other channels, such as The Weird Bible, which is our show we do with Wendigoon about the Bible, and obviously the weird stuff in it. We also have the History Hut, which we are in talks to bring a podcast back for with a very special guest that I'm excited to be able to announce at some point. We also have my personal streaming channel at the Aiden Mattis, or Aiden Mattis here on YouTube. That is mostly a gaming channel at the moment. We're willing to devote it to other things, but gaming is currently the most popular content over there. I play a lot of Helldivers, and that's most of what we do right now is Helldivers and Halo, which I'm not mad about. If that's stuff that interests you, come hang out. We also occasionally play Content Warning, Lethal Company, GTFO, other extraction shooter type games. So if that's something you enjoy and you want to see the chaos that likely goes on behind the scenes, because it does, please go ahead and check that out. We also have 2 new channels, Off the Record with Luke Eccles and Boozy Mixologist. Those are about music and about bartending. You can check those out for podcasts on those content, and we also have some new shows coming to those soon that we've recently conceived. So they're going to be getting some more sit-down, edited, recorded, almost Lore Lodge style content. Well, I think that just about covers it. I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.